He thought he was just helping an alien girl. Until the test was revealed, Ethan had spent most of his life traveling through the vastness of space. As a freelance transporter, he was used to the endless hum of his ship and the silence that filled the cold stretches between planets. He preferred it that way, quiet, predictable, and, for the most part, peaceful. The only interruptions were the occasional cargo run or passengers who needed transport. But today, something felt different. The mission was simple enough. He had to pick up a few supplies from a small colony on the edge of the galaxy and return to his base. The colony was nothing special, just a few hundred people making a living on a dusty rock, surrounded by the emptiness of space. Ethan had been here before, and it was always the same, quiet routine. That was until he spotted her. She was standing at the edge of the colony's spaceport, her clothes tattered and her posture stiff. The alien girl stood out among the humans bustling around. Her skin was a soft lavender color, and her eyes, which shimmered with an almost unnatural glow, looked lost. She didn't seem to belong. Her eyes darted around, searching for something or someone, but there was no one coming to help her. Ethan was used to seeing all kinds of strange beings at spaceports, but there was something different about her. Something urgent in the way she stood there, waiting. Curiosity piqued. Ethan approached her, careful not to startle her. As he got closer, he could see that her eyes were wide with confusion, but also with fear. It wasn't the kind of fear you'd expect from someone being chased. It was the fear of someone who was completely out of their element, lost and without a way back. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but kind. He didn't know why, but he had the instinct to help. It was just who he was. He'd spent years in space helping people who needed a hand, even if they were strangers. The girl didn't respond at first. She just stared at him, her pupils dilating slightly. She opened her mouth, but only a few soft sounds came out, barely recognizable as words. Ethan raised an eyebrow, realizing the communication barrier. "I don't speak your language," he said, trying to smile reassuringly. "But I can help you. Are you lost?" She seemed to hesitate, unsure if she could trust him. After a long moment, she finally nodded, but her expression remained guarded. She reached into the tattered remains of her clothes and pulled out a small, glowing device. A translator, Ethan guessed. She activated it with a few simple gestures, and it hummed to life, projecting a soft, melodic voice from the tiny device. "I am Lyra," she said. "I am stranded." Ethan nodded, trying to make sense of the situation. "Stranded? How did you end up here?" "I do not know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was aboard a ship, but it crashed." She looked down at the ground for a moment, clearly conflicted, as if there were more she wanted to say but couldn't. Her gaze flickered back up to Ethan, and he could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I need help." Ethan wasn't sure what to make of it. A crashed ship, an alien girl in distress. It wasn't the first time he had encountered something strange in his years of travel, but something about this girl seemed different. She didn't seem like the typical lost traveler. There was an intensity in her eyes, a sharpness that betrayed her calm exterior. Ethan's instincts told him there was more to her than she was letting on. "Where are you from?" he asked, his voice calm. "And why didn't you contact someone for help?" Lyra seemed to hesitate again, a flicker of something crossing her face. She was holding something back, that much was clear. "I can't. My ship was not registered," she finally said, her voice quiet, almost too quiet. "It was not meant to be here." Ethan frowned, still trying to piece things together. He could tell she was hiding something, but he wasn't about to press her too hard. After all, everyone had their reasons for being secretive. If she was in trouble, he would help her. That's what he did. He wasn't one to turn his back on someone in need. "All right," he said, offering her a small smile. "I can help you get back to your ship. Let's see if we can find it." She nodded quickly, her expression softening slightly, but the wariness never left her eyes. She turned and began walking briskly in the direction of the nearby docks. Ethan followed her, his boots making soft echoes in the quiet spaceport. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but glance over at her every now and then. There was something strange about her. She moved with an elegance that was almost unnatural, like she wasn't quite human. Her steps were fluid, almost too graceful, and her posture was perfect. It wasn't just the way she walked that caught his attention. It was the way she carried herself, with a kind of quiet authority that seemed at odds with her lost appearance. They arrived at a small docking bay, one of many that housed ships of various sizes and shapes. Ethan glanced around, looking for any sign of a crash, but the area seemed calm and undisturbed. The few ships that were docked here appeared intact, no signs of a wreckage. Lyra stopped in front of a dark, sleek vessel, a ship that looked far more advanced than anything he had ever seen. Its surface shimmered under the dim lights of the spaceport, and it had a smooth, organic design that reminded him of nothing on Earth. The ship's hull seemed to hum with an energy all its own, almost as if it were alive. "This is your ship?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "It doesn't look damaged." She nodded, but her expression turned grave. "It is not the ship," she said. "It is me, I am." "Damaged?" Ethan furrowed his brow, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Lyra glanced at him, her eyes glowing faintly in the low light. "I am not like you, not like humans." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, the ship's ramp lowered with a soft hiss, and a strange sensation filled the air. The low hum of the ship grew louder, and Ethan felt a slight pressure in his chest, as though the air itself was shifting. Lyra's eyes locked with his, her gaze intense and searching. "You will help me, won't you?" she asked, her voice low but filled with an edge of urgency. Ethan hesitated for a moment, sensing that something more was at play here than a simple case of being stranded. But something in her eyes, a quiet plea for help, made him nod. "Of course, I'll help you." As they boarded the ship, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Lyra's calm demeanor, her strange behavior, the way she had approached him in the first place, it all seemed off. But for now, he put those thoughts aside. He was here to help her. That's all that mattered. The door hissed shut behind them, and the strange hum of the ship intensified. Lyra led him down a narrow corridor, her movements quick and purposeful. She didn't look back, but Ethan could feel her eyes on him, watching, assessing. For the first time since they met, Ethan began to feel that he wasn't the one in control. Something about Lyra wasn't right, and he was about to find out just how much he didn't understand. Ethan sat in the cockpit of his ship, the horizon, staring out at the stars as the engine hummed steadily beneath him. The vastness of space stretched out before him, a comforting and familiar sight. It was a feeling he had known for years, empty, endless but peaceful. He turned to glance at Lyra, who was sitting quietly in the passenger seat. She hadn't said much since they left the spaceport, her demeanor still calm but distant, as if she were lost in thought. Lyra had been a mystery from the moment they met, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. He wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps it was the way she seemed to be constantly watching him, or the strange, almost unnatural aura that seemed to surround her. She was still the same as when they first met, composed, collected, but distant. She didn't seem to have any visible injuries, and yet she had spoken of being damaged. What exactly did she mean by that? As the hours passed, the silence between them grew thicker. Ethan tried to engage her in conversation, asking about her homeworld, her people, anything that might give him some insight into who she really was. But her answers were always vague. "I come from far away," she would say, "a place beyond the stars." She spoke of the galaxy in a way that seemed almost detached, as if she were an observer rather than a part of it. She never revealed much, and Ethan couldn't help but feel she was hiding something important. He shook his head, trying to focus on the task at hand. His job was simple: get Lyra to her ship and make sure she was safe. He had no reason to doubt her story, not yet anyway. She was just an alien girl lost in space, looking for help. He had met many people like her before, stranded travelers who had nowhere else to turn. It was his job to help them, simple as that. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked, trying to break the silence. He reached into the small fridge and pulled out a packet of protein bars. "I have some food. It's not much, but it should do the trick." Lyra looked at the bar in his hand, her eyes flickering with curiosity. She hesitated for a moment before taking the bar, tearing open the packaging with a delicate motion. She didn't eat immediately, but instead studied it for a few seconds, as if unsure of what to do with it. "I do not eat the same as humans," she said softly, almost apologetically. Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, what do you eat then?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She looked down at the bar again, then back at Ethan. "I do not need to eat in the same way you do," she said slowly. "My body requires different sustenance." Ethan's curiosity grew. "What do you need then?" She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Energy," she said, almost as if the word held more meaning than its simple definition. "Different forms of energy." Ethan nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He'd heard of different alien species needing alternative forms of nourishment, but this was the first time he had met someone who was so vague about it. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of creature Lyra really was. They continued on in silence for a while longer. Ethan focused on piloting the ship, but his mind kept drifting back to Lyra. There was something about her, something that tugged at him, made him want to protect her, to understand her better. She was clearly out of place, not just in the physical sense but in the way she interacted with the world. It wasn't just her appearance. It was the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way her eyes seemed to hold secrets. As the ship sailed through the quiet expanse of space, Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shift in the atmosphere. He felt a slight pressure in the air, a sensation that he couldn't quite explain. It was subtle but unmistakable. Something had changed. He glanced over at Lyra. Her expression had shifted too. Her eyes, which had been calm and distant moments ago, were now wide and alert. She was staring at the monitors, her gaze fixed on something he couldn't see. Her fingers twitched at her side as if she were preparing for something. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his voice cautious. He knew better than to ignore a feeling of tension in space. Something was happening. Lyra didn't respond immediately. She seemed focused, her entire body stiff with concentration. Then, without warning, she reached out and placed her hand on the ship's control panel. A soft hum filled the air, and the ship seemed to vibrate under her touch. Ethan's eyes widened in surprise as the ship's systems flickered to life in a way he hadn't seen before. Lights flashed across the console and strange symbols appeared on the screens. "Lyra," Ethan said, his voice tight with concern. "What are you doing?" Lyra's gaze flickered toward him, but her expression remained unreadable. "I must recalibrate the ship," she said, her voice cool but urgent. "There is something wrong. The coordinates we are heading toward are not accurate." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the navigation system. "What do you mean? We're heading straight for the station you mentioned." Lyra didn't respond, her focus entirely on the ship's systems. The symbols on the screen began to shift and change, rearranging themselves in a pattern Ethan didn't recognize. The ship's hum grew louder, more insistent, and Ethan felt the faintest tremor under his feet. He looked back at Lyra, his concern growing. "Lyra, what's going on? What's happening?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Ethan saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. There was a flicker of something, fear, or maybe it was something darker, something that told him she knew more than she was letting on. I cannot explain," she said softly, her voice tight with tension, "but you must trust me. There is something in the space around us, something dangerous." Ethan's pulse quickened. Dangerous? What was she talking about? They had been flying through deep space, miles away from any known threats. There shouldn't be anything out here, nothing but empty space. Yet, looking at Lyra's serious expression, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was more than just a glitch in the system. Before he could ask more, the ship lurched violently, throwing Ethan against his seat. The lights flickered, and a deep rumble echoed through the hull. The ship seemed to shake with the force of an invisible impact, and Ethan felt his heart race as he struggled to keep control of the ship. "What's happening?" he shouted, his hands gripping the controls tightly. Lyra's face was pale now, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and concentration. "We are not alone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Something has followed us." Ethan's eyes widened in horror. "What followed us? From where?" Lyra's hand moved quickly over the controls again, her fingers dancing over the console with an unnatural precision. "They've found us, and they won't stop until we're destroyed." Ethan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of her words. Who was she talking about? And why hadn't she warned him earlier? He glanced at the radar and his stomach dropped. There just outside the ship was a dark shape, something enormous, moving steadily toward them through the void. "Lyra," Ethan said, his voice shaky. "What is that?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the screen, her face a mask of fear. The shape outside the ship grew larger, and Ethan's heart began to pound. He knew whatever was out there was not friendly. And now he realized they were being hunted. Ethan's hands tightened around the controls, his mind racing. The dark shape outside their ship was moving closer, and every instinct he had as a pilot told him they were in trouble. This wasn't just a random encounter. Lyra's words echoed in his mind. "They've found us, and they won't stop until we're destroyed." His eyes darted to the radar screen again. The shape was massive, a hulking black silhouette with no clear edges, moving like a shadow in space. It was no ordinary ship. It was something far larger, far more terrifying. "What the hell is that?" Ethan muttered under his breath, his mind working quickly to assess the situation. "Lyra, talk to me. What's happening?" Lyra was motionless in her seat beside him, her expression grim. She hadn't even blinked since the ship had been shaken by the sudden tremor. Her hands hovered over the console, her fingers trembling as she quickly tapped a series of commands. But even with all her precision, nothing seemed to stop the ship's violent shuddering. Ethan's heart pounded as the shadow outside their ship grew larger, and the hum of the ship's engines began to falter. The lights flickered and a strange noise like the screech of metal echoed through the hull. The ship was losing power. "What's happening?" Ethan asked again, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. "We're being intercepted," Lyra finally said, her voice quieter than before. "By an enemy force." "Enemy force," Ethan repeated, his mind struggling to comprehend what was going on. "Who are they? What do they want with us?" Lyra's eyes flickered to him, her expression conflicted. They are not here for you, not directly, but you are in danger because of me." Ethan felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. "What are you talking about? What do they want with you?" For a long moment, Lyra didn't speak. She seemed to be lost in thought, her gaze distant and focused, her body tense. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but filled with urgency. "I'm not just a stranded traveler, Ethan. I didn't crash here by accident. My arrival on this planet, on this ship, it was all part of something much bigger." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, bigger? You said you were lost. You said you needed help." Lyra nodded slowly. "I did, but that was only part of the truth, the rest. It's something I wasn't ready to tell you." The ship shuddered again, and Ethan's hands tightened on the controls, trying to steady the ship as best as he could. The shadow outside them was moving ever closer, and the feeling of impending doom was starting to feel all too real. "Lyra," he said, his voice sharper now, "you need to tell me everything, now." She finally turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and regret. "I am not just a survivor, I am a scout, a test subject. My people sent me here to observe humanity, To determine whether your species is worthy of joining the Galactic Federation. Ethan stared at her, stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. What do you mean, you came here to test us? To test me? His voice rose with anger and he struggled to process the information. You didn't just crash here, you were sent here on purpose. Lyra nodded. Yes, I was sent to observe, to study you and your kind. To see if humans have the potential to join a much larger, more powerful collective of species, but I failed. Ethan's mind was reeling. Failed? How did you fail? What does that even mean? The test wasn't about you, Ethan. It was about humanity. You weren't meant to help me. You were meant to fail. Her voice faltered for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. My mission was to see how humans would react under pressure, whether your species would react with aggression, with fear, or with unity. But I wasn't prepared for what I found. Ethan sat back in his seat, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He couldn't wrap his mind around what Lyra was saying. She had been sent to study humanity, to test them like lab rats. But that wasn't all. There was something else, something deeper that Lyra was holding back. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Ethan asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Why keep all this from me? Lyra didn't answer right away. Her gaze shifted to the black shape outside the ship, which was now just moments away. Because I didn't want to believe it, she said quietly. I didn't want to believe that your species could be more than just a test, but I see now that you are more than that. You've passed the test, Ethan. You showed me something no other species has. You showed me the potential for something better. Ethan's confusion deepened, but before he could ask any more questions, the ship was rocked by another violent impact. This time, it felt like they were being pulled, dragged, toward the massive shadow that loomed outside them. The hull groaned and alarms blared, filling the cockpit with a sharp, metallic wail. Lyra, what's happening? Ethan shouted, fear creeping into his voice for the first time. What is that thing? What's going on? They've found me, Lyra said, her voice tinged with regret. My people, they came to collect me. Before Ethan could respond, the ship systems shut down completely. The hum of the engines died and all the lights went out, leaving them in complete darkness. The only sound was the pounding of Ethan's heart in his chest. Lyra quickly reached out, tapping the console, trying to bring the ship back online. I can't fight them off. Not alone, she said. They're too powerful. Who are they? Ethan asked, panic rising in his chest. Who are they, Lyra? Lyra took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she worked desperately to restore power. They are my people, she said. But they are not like me. They are an advanced race, ruthless in their ways. They view humanity as a threat, an obstacle. If they know what I've learned, if they know how I've changed my perspective, they won't allow us to survive. They will destroy you. They will destroy Earth. Ethan's mind spun as the realization hit him. This wasn't just about him. This was about all of humanity. Lyra wasn't just a lost traveler. She was a part of a far larger, far more dangerous scheme. Her people were powerful, and if they saw humanity as a threat, there would be no stopping them. Suddenly, the lights flickered back to life, and the ship's systems hummed again, but it was too late. The massive shadow outside them had finally caught up. A bright light pierced through the cockpit, blinding them both for a moment. A deep, low voice reverberated through the ship's walls. You cannot hide from us, Lyra, the voice boomed. You have broken the laws of our people. You will be judged. Ethan's heart sank as he realized what was happening. Lyra was being hunted. And now, because of her, they were all in danger. Ethan's mind raced as the voice reverberated through the ship's walls, shaking him to his core. The harsh, metallic tone of the voice sent a chill down his spine. You cannot hide from us, Lyra. You have broken the laws of our people. You will be judged. The words echoed in his ears, and for a moment everything seemed to slow down. His breathing grew shallow and his hands tightened around the ship's controls. Lyra, Ethan said, his voice tight with fear. What does that mean? Who are they? What do they want from you? Lyra's face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. She was no longer the calm, composed figure that had boarded his ship only hours ago. Now she looked like someone who had been cornered, someone who had no way out. They are part of my people, Lyra said, her voice strained. But they are not like me. They are the enforcers, the ones who ensure that no one breaks the rules. They will not forgive me for what I've done. They will not allow humanity to exist if they think you are a threat. Ethan's mind swirled with confusion. Enforcers, rules. It didn't make sense. Everything had happened so fast. One moment, Lyra was a stranded traveler, and now she was being hunted by a race of beings who saw humanity as a threat. It was too much to comprehend. He turned his gaze to the radar. The massive shape outside their ship was closer than ever, its outline now unmistakable. A giant vessel, sleek and menacing, its surface reflecting the light of distant stars. It was clear they were outmatched. The ship was enormous, much larger than anything he had ever seen, and it was getting closer with each passing second. "What can we do?" Ethan asked, his voice rising in desperation. "How do we fight them off?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She was staring at the control panel, her fingers trembling as she punched in commands. But the ship systems were still unstable, and she couldn't get them to respond in time. The power was fluctuating, and the ship's engines were barely functioning. "There's nothing we can do," Lyra said quietly, almost to herself. "They are too powerful. They've anticipated every move." Ethan clenched his jaw. "There's always a way out. We just have to think." He scanned the ship's instruments, looking for anything that could help. His mind worked frantically, piecing together whatever he could about the situation. They couldn't just give up. They had to find a way to fight back. "What if we try to outmaneuver them?" Ethan suggested, his mind racing. "We could use the ship's thrusters to make a quick jump, get to a nearby asteroid field, or—" "No," Lyra interrupted, her voice firm. "They'll track us. We'll be in their sights the moment we make a move. They don't rely on just technology. They can sense energy. They know where we are, no matter what we do." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't just a battle of technology. This was something more, something beyond anything he could fight with his ship systems. "Then what do you suggest?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "How do we stop them?" Lyra hesitated for a moment before looking at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and sadness. "We don't stop them, Ethan. We only delay them." "Delay them, you mean?" "We run." Ethan's mind raced, but he knew they couldn't outrun this enemy, not unless they were willing to risk everything. Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act quickly, they'll destroy the horizon and everything in its path." Ethan's thoughts flickered back to the time he had spent alone in space, drifting between planets, handling small missions, never thinking he'd be caught up in something like this. Now, everything had changed. He was no longer just a transporter. He was part of something much bigger, a test, a fight for survival. "What do we need to do?" he asked, determination growing in his chest. "Tell me, I'll do whatever it takes." Lyra didn't say anything at first. She seemed to weigh her options carefully, her fingers hovering over the control panel, as if searching for something that might give them an edge. Then, with a deep breath, she turned to him. "We need to reach the core of their ship," she said. "If we can get inside, I can override their systems. I can shut down their communication network, disrupt their navigation, but it's risky. We won't have much time, and once we're inside, we'll have no way to escape if things go wrong." Ethan didn't hesitate. "We'll do it." "We have to try." Lyra nodded, her face a mask of resolve. "Good. We have to be quick. They won't give us more than a few minutes once we're inside their systems." Ethan adjusted the ship's controls, setting a course toward the massive enemy vessel. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as they drew closer, the enormity of the situation settling in. This was no longer just about survival. It was about proving something to himself, to Lyra, and to the entire human race. They weren't going to just give up without a fight. The enemy ship loomed ahead, its surface gleaming like black glass, almost alive with the pulsating energy that radiated from within. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had never seen anything like it before. It was a marvel of engineering, something far beyond anything Earth had ever achieved. "Lyra," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "I need you to tell me exactly what to do. I can't do this alone." Lyra didn't answer immediately. She was studying the ship's exterior, calculating the best approach. "We're going to dock with them. I'll give you the coordinates, and we'll need to get close enough to their hull to use the ship's docking clamps. Once we're attached, I'll try to open the airlock remotely." Ethan's grip on the controls tightened. He could feel the tension in his muscles as he guided the horizon toward the enemy ship. They were getting closer, and every second counted. He could hear the rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines and the distant hum of the enemy vessel's power systems. It was like a pulse, steady and unrelenting, growing louder as they approached. "Just tell me when," Ethan said, his voice low. Lyra's eyes were locked on the ship, her gaze intense. "Now," she said suddenly. Without hesitation, Ethan moved the ship into position, aligning the docking clamps with a small access point on the side of the enemy vessel. The tension in the air was palpable as the horizon moved closer and closer. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If they failed, there would be no escape, no way out. The docking clamps latched onto the enemy ship with a resounding click. For a moment there was silence, then a sharp hiss as the ship's airlock sealed. Ethan didn't wait. He immediately grabbed his weapon, checking it one last time before turning to Lyra. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded, her face set in a mask of determination. "I'm ready." Together, they moved quickly through the narrow corridors of the horizon, making their way to the airlock. The seconds seemed to stretch out forever as the reality of what they were about to do hit him. They were about to infiltrate an enemy ship with no guarantee of survival. "Stay close," Lyra whispered as they stepped into the airlock. "And stay quiet." The airlock door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the cold, sterile interior of the enemy vessel. The walls were dark, smooth, and unyielding. There were no windows, no signs of life, only the eerie hum of the ship's energy systems. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment of truth. They stepped forward, moving carefully through the dark corridors, Lyra leading the way. Ethan's mind was focused, but the unease in his gut never left. They had to succeed, for humanity's sake, for their own sake. They didn't have much time. The metallic hiss of the enemy ship's airlock door closing behind them echoed through the narrow hallway. Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. He glanced at Lyra, her expression hard but determined, as she led the way through the cold, sterile corridors of the alien vessel. They had made it this far. Now they just had to survive long enough to stop whatever it was that had been set in motion. Ethan's fingers brushed the cold, smooth walls of the enemy ship as he followed Lyra. The atmosphere felt thick, charged with the strange energy of the ship. It was like walking through the heart of a beast, and for a moment he couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was alive, watching them. Lyra moved with purpose, her footsteps light and quick, her eyes scanning every corner and passage they passed. It was clear she knew the ship well, even though it was obvious she had never intended to be here under these circumstances. She wasn't just running from her people. She was leading Ethan into the heart of their control. "We're almost there," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible in the dead silence of the ship. "We need to reach the central core. That's where I can disable their systems." Ethan nodded, trying to steady his breathing. Every muscle in his body was on edge, and he was keenly aware of the stakes. If they failed now, there would be no going back. Humanity's future hung in the balance. Not just his own survival, but the survival of every person on Earth. As they moved deeper into the ship, the hum of the vessel seemed to grow louder. more pronounced. The walls around them pulsed with energy, as though the ship was responding to their presence. It wasn't like anything he had ever felt before. It was like being in the belly of a creature, its every movement syncing with the rhythm of his heartbeat. Lyra stopped in front of a large door, taller than any human door Ethan had ever seen. It was made of a smooth, shimmering material that seemed to ripple slightly in the dim light. She placed her hand on the door, and the surface immediately parted with a soft, almost inaudible sound, revealing the massive, glowing heart of the enemy ship. The core was unlike anything Ethan could have imagined. It was a vast chamber, filled with floating platforms and intricate, glowing pathways that connected everything in an almost organic pattern. In the center of the room stood a towering structure, a crystal-like formation, pulsing with bright, fluctuating energy. It hummed like a living organism, and Ethan could feel the power emanating from it, a force that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "This is it," Lyra said quietly, stepping forward. "The control center of their ship. I need to get close to the core to access their systems." Ethan followed her, his eyes scanning the room. The space was eerily quiet, and there was no sign of the enemy. It was as though the ship was holding its breath, waiting for them to make the first move. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lyra approached the core, her fingers moving with precision as she tapped a series of commands into a small device on her wrist. The glowing pathways around the room flickered, and the crystal at the center of the room pulsed with a sudden, blinding light. The ship seemed to react, its hum intensifying. "Lyra," Ethan called out, his voice tense. "What's happening?" "I'm in," Lyra said, her voice filled with a sense of urgency. "But they've locked down their systems. It's going to take time to override it. We don't have long." Ethan's mind raced. He had no idea how long they could stay here without being discovered. His eyes darted around the room, looking for any signs of movement. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the ship's enforcers were already on their way. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a loud, mechanical sound. Ethan whipped around, his pulse racing. The walls of the room shifted, revealing a group of armored figures, alien soldiers, their eyes glowing with a bright, unsettling light. They moved swiftly, surrounding them with precision. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was it. They had found them. The soldiers raised their weapons, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. Ethan's mind was a blur. He had no plan, no backup, no way out. The soldiers were closing in, their footsteps loud and deliberate, each one calculated to ensure there was no escape. Lyra's eyes widened as the soldiers drew closer, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. Ethan watched in shock as she focused all her energy on the alien soldiers. The glowing pathways around the room pulsed, and for a split second the entire room was bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The soldiers froze in place. Ethan's eyes widened. "What the hell did you just do?" "They are connected to the ship's core," Lyra said, her voice strained. "I've interrupted their neural link to the ship. They can't move." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was like she had turned off their ability to function just like that. But how long would it last? "We don't have much time," Lyra said, her voice hard. "I've given us a window, but it won't hold for long. We need to finish this now." Ethan didn't need any more convincing. He moved quickly to her side, grabbing a weapon from one of the frozen soldiers and aiming it at the central control panel. Lyra's fingers were still flying across her wrist device, her face etched with concentration. For a moment, everything seemed to fall into place. Ethan could hear the soft hum of the ship, the low growl of the enemy's power systems as they struggled to maintain control. He could feel the tension building, the knowledge that every second they stayed here brought them closer to failure. "Done," Lyra said suddenly, and Ethan felt the air shift as the crystal at the center of the room flickered, its light dimming. The ship's hum slowly quieted, and for the first time since they boarded, Ethan felt a rush of hope. They had done it. But it wasn't over. Not yet. "We need to leave," Lyra said urgently, turning toward the exit. "They'll be coming for us soon." Ethan followed her without hesitation, his mind still racing. He couldn't believe it. They had done it. The enemy ship systems were down, and they had managed to stop the threat. But Lyra was right. They weren't out of danger yet. The soldiers would be waking up any moment, and they had no idea how much time they had before the entire ship went on high alert. They moved quickly, retracing their steps back toward the airlock. The walls of the ship seemed to close in around them, the quiet hum of the vessel growing louder again. Lyra's steps were quick, but her face was still filled with tension. She had done what she needed to do, but there was no telling what would happen next. Ethan's mind raced as he followed her. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about humanity, about the future of the human race. They had proven themselves capable of fighting back against forces much larger than themselves. And in doing so, they had earned their place in the galaxy. But what would happen now? What would Lyra's people do when they found out what had happened? Would they see humanity as an ally or as a threat to be eliminated? He didn't know, and maybe it didn't matter, not right now. They reached the airlock, and Lyra quickly disengaged the system, opening the hatch to the horizon. The bright light of space greeted them, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. "Let's go," Lyra said, her voice steady but with a note of finality. Ethan nodded, stepping into the airlock, and as the door closed behind them, he realized something. This was just the beginning. Whatever came next, they had shown the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. They had survived against impossible odds, and that would change everything.